Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, unafraid to move our time slot, more enthralling than the Super Bowl, weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and the whiplash it could cause its fan base with splash departures and splash replacements. I'm Eric Hansen, back from an epic trip to Chicago on Monday and ready for an epic snowstorm allegedly to hit South Bend. He's Tyler James with epic facial expressions in the port. Together, we're the content creators, writers, editors, and pickleball team at InsideNDSports.com. On tonight's show, we'll break down the latest coaching edition, running backs coach Ja'Juan Seider, and get you up to date on Notre Dame's search for a new GM and what the next steps should look like. More coaching turnover to come. We'll answer that question, hit all the right notes with recruiting, take a peek at some fun spring topics, decode and answer your questions, and stumble over my words. Fill up the queue. This is And if I hadn't tried to correct myself, I would have hit that on the mark still. And Tyler has muted himself. So
there we go. My phone keeps going off, so I've been trying to avoid that playing, and then I forgot to unmute.
I'll tell you what, we have not been drinking. I have coffee, and that's it.
I have water.
Okay.
Allegedly, just like the snowstorm ahead.
Okay. Well, Tyler, I know you want to talk now, so I will be quiet.
Yes, and fortunately, I remember to turn my mic on so folks can hear me talking. Thank you for everyone tuning in. Make sure that you're subscribed to us here on our YouTube channel. Cost you nothing. Just click that subscribe button. That allows you to get questions in during the show, which we obviously take your questions live. So feel free to fill up the queue, and that also make sure that you don't miss any of our content. It'll show up in your YouTube feed whenever we post a video, whether it's a live show or something that we've recorded ahead of time. We'd also like you to join us over at InsideNDSports.com if you haven't already. That's where you can get access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us over on the Insider Lounge, where we share our inside information first. You can try us out over there with a 30-day free trial using promo code NDYT. There is a link to subscribe in the video description below and a constant scrolling reminder at the bottom of the screen. So we appreciate you guys hanging out with us tonight, and we will get started with our opening drive on Notre Dame quickly replacing Deland McCullough. As you should know by now, running backs coach Deland McCullough left Notre Dame after 3 seasons to coach for Pete Carroll with the Las Vegas Raiders. And then within 4 days, we learned that Notre Dame was expected to hire Penn State's Ja'Juan Seider to replace him. Seider has been the running backs coach at Penn State since 2018, and that's quite a long time for an assistant coach to be in one place anymore these days. Eric, why do you think Seider is the right choice for Notre Dame?
Well, I think he's a great blend of a lot of good things. Player development, recruiting. He's a former quarterback, so he kind of brings that perspective to the offense. And he's a guy that's been a co-offensive coordinator, so I think he'll bring some fun ideas and some innovative ideas to Notre Dame's offense. Think about the way Tyler Warren was used. Now, again, that was the not his idea, not Seider's idea, but he certainly was in those meeting rooms. And the other thing I really like about him is he has head coaching ambitions. That means he won't stay forever, but I do think it's a guy that really brings a great work ethic and great creativity. I just really applaud this hiring by Marcus Freeman, because wrestling him away from Penn State with those 2 running backs coming back was pretty impressive.
Yeah, when you put together a sort of like, okay, a wish list of who do you think would make sense to go for Notre Dame to go after, I think Seider makes the list if you have any sense of like who the top running backs coaches are nationally. But I don't know that anyone could have predicted necessarily that he would be wanting and willing to come to Notre Dame, especially like you mentioned that he has arguably the best running back duo in college football last season, and they're coming back, and Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. Now, certainly Notre Dame would like to have a say in that as well with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. He's coached some talented running backs, coached Miles Sanders in his final season at Penn State before he went on to the NFL. So yeah, the resume there speaks for itself. What do you think this says about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman and its ability to lure him away from Penn State?
Well, I think there's three things that come to mind for me, Tyler. One is Notre Dame is not afraid to pay for quality. And I think you shouldn't just escalate these salaries just because you're looking for a replacement. I mean, if you're going to get a replacement, get somebody like Ja'Juan Seider if you're going to pay the money. So they were able to get him away from Penn State. I think it also says Ja'Juan looks at this and probably says, this is a better path for me to get to be a head coach. I feel like this is going to serve that end. And he's been very vocal about wanting to eventually be a head coach on the college level at some point. And then I think the third thing is one of the things that Mike Denbrock brought up when he signed on last offseason, and that was he believes in Marcus Freeman as a head coach. And now you even have more of a resume to base that on. But I think it really speaks well to where people think Marcus Freeman is headed as a head coach and with his potential. How about you, Tyler? What do you think?
Yeah, I do think it speaks to the perception that Freeman sort of elevates coaches and has a culture that allows them to be successful. Certainly the talent on Notre Dame's roster is attractive in taking the running back's job. It has to be if you're leaving what you're walking away from at Penn State. I think it says that Notre Dame is willing to pay for top end for some of the best assistant coaches in the country. Like they're not afraid to put out high salaries for guys that they think are among the best in the country. And I think that was the case here with Seider. Certainly maybe you save some money that you were going to be paying to Al Golden. Maybe Chris Ash is a bit cheaper than Al Golden was going to be. But I think that he was well paid at Penn State. I think we'll be getting even more pay at Notre Dame. So all the things sort of come together to make this a reason that he would be willing to come to Notre Dame.
And one of the things when people talked about the media rights deal and how important was that for Notre Dame to sign a lucrative extension with NBC, these are the days where that matters. You know, if you had a much lesser deal, you couldn't get into a competitive salary situation with a Big Ten team like Penn State. This shows that Notre Dame can do that thanks in part to that media rights deal. So that's something to tuck away.
All right. And how do you think Seider can help Notre Dame as a recruiter?
I think he can help by continuing to do really good evaluations. Obviously, he's done that at Penn State, getting top-tier backs to visit and getting them signed, and then developing and retaining them. And retaining them as part of it. I thought it was interesting that both of those backs, both Singleton and Allen, decided to stay at Penn State. Now, they did that before they knew that he was going to leave and so forth. And I don't know that that necessarily would have changed their minds, but you know, the fact that they felt like they could still develop under him rather than going to the NFL, because both of those are NFL caliber backs, I thought was really interesting. So how about you, Tyler? What do you think?
Yeah, I think he has a strong resume as a recruiter. The willingness that he's shown to play multiple running backs, I think will continue to play well at Notre Dame, both as a recruiter and as a coach. Certainly when you look at current recruits, the 2026 running back commit that Penn State has is Messiah Mickens, and he was the first in the class to commit. He's the number 8 running back for 2026, according to Rivals. And that's someone that Notre Dame was interested in. Messiah visited Notre Dame back in 2023. Notre Dame offered about a year later, and for its Pot of Gold Day in 2024. And even though he was committed to Penn State, he tweeted about that offer. I think he visited South Carolina for a game this past fall, so he's at least been willing to look elsewhere. And he's been a vocal might be a stretch, but he's been tweeting about Seider and their relationship and what he's going to do now. So it's something that obviously is impacting him, the fact that Seider left Penn State. So that could be an immediate impact felt. But yeah, if you look back, I posted a story this evening for our subscribers on Inside Indy Sports about what he's been able to do as a recruiter. He's signed 12 running backs during his time at Penn State. 10 of those were 4-star recruits. Devin Ford and Noah Kane were top 50 overall guys in the 2019 class, which was his first class. That's coming off the success of Saquon Barkley. I think it was easy to recruit running backs to Penn State back then, or a little bit easier. And you would think, like with Jeremiah Love at Notre Dame too, that's going to be a position for successful recruiting at Notre Dame. And then Nicholas Singleton was also a top 50 overall recruit in the 2022 class when he signed. And he also has ties in Florida. He went to high school there, was an assistant coach at the high school level for 7 seasons to start his career down in South Florida. And if you look at some of the guys that have signed to the programs that he's been at, he's been connected to Florida recruits at all of the schools he's been at, whether it's Marshall, West Virginia, Florida, obviously Florida, that makes a lot of sense, but Penn State as well. Even guys like, I mean, maybe you're not that locked into Marshall football, but Rakeem Cato was a quarterback there who set all kinds of program records. And
they were locked into Marshall one particular Saturday.
Yeah, right. But not when Rakeem Cato was behind center. He set all kinds of records, and he came up from Florida after Seider recruited him to Marshall. So a good long track record of history of recruiting in Florida, which I think Notre Dame could use some experience and help with moving forward.
Yeah, and I should mention when Seider, you mentioned his Florida ties, but he was a backup quarterback at West Virginia and then ended up transferring to Florida A&M for a year, and he was an All-American and really had some great success at Florida A&M.
And then lastly, on the coaching front, do you think we've seen the end of Notre Dame's coaching turnover?
Well, the last of the NFL head coaches have been hired, and that doesn't mean all their assistants have been hired. So there's still going to be some coaching movement throughout both the pro and the college levels. I think it probably is. I know that, Tyler, you had some news today about someone looking at Mike Mickens. I'll let you share that, but I would lean more toward it's probably over than not. But again, until that NFL coaching carousel completely stops, there's moves that could not necessarily go from Notre Dame to the NFL, but move somewhere else creates an opening that is attractive to a Notre Dame coach, maybe getting a chance to be a coordinator.
Yeah, and JP mentioned Mike Mickens. So I'll put his question on the screen here. Like Eric alluded to, Mike Mickens is a reported target for Texas's safeties position. Orange Bloods, the Texas site for Rivals, has reported Mickens is one of the top targets on Steve Sarkisian's wish list. Personally, I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense unless Mickens wants to step away from Freeman and is paid handsomely to do so. Now, certainly Texas would be among the schools you would think would be willing to pay out high salaries for coaches with where they're at, and they're pushed to try to improve. So yeah, I like to think it's getting close to over, but I think Mike Mickens is still a popular name and it has earned a lot of attention for what he's done recently. For his Notre Dame career. And though we were told that he was expected to stay on staff when Chris Ash was hired as the defensive coordinator and Mickens wasn't the defensive coordinator, I still wouldn't be absolutely shocked if Mickens was hired somewhere else, but I'm not necessarily predicting it will happen either. All right, Eric. We have a couple of questions we can throw in here. Okay. And it'll lead us into our conversation about the general manager. But first, Jeff Stevens says, when will you have a chance to talk with the early enrollees?
I'm thinking we will get something before spring. We always have. We usually do it in February, but with the GM thing not being settled and there being some other assistant coaching moves, I think that got pushed back a little bit. This year also that the playoff pushed things back too.
Right.
Because there have been times we've spoken to those guys as early as January.
Yeah.
But I do believe that that'll be coming up here soon. We just don't have an exact date, and my magic 8-ball is not working today.
Yeah, we have talked to some of those guys in the past while coaching searches have happened, or like coaching searches have, like a coach has left after we talked to them. But it does make sense to maybe hold off until the cycle comes to a close, although you never really know when it's done. And especially once Notre Dame, especially knowing that it has guys, I mean, it's announced Ash, but hasn't announced Seider yet. Once that gets
sorry, Jeff Stevens said something funny.
Once that gets followed through, then maybe we'll get to talk to him.
I can't look at the comments because I'll laugh and ruin the show. So,
all right, Irish fan says the Seider hire feels good, but what are you guys hearing about the GM search? So that'll throw us into our discussion about Notre Dame's continuing search for a general manager. Late last week, James Blanchard finally made the decision to stay at Texas Tech after spending time on Notre Dame's campus and giving long consideration to the job. Why do you think it didn't work out, Eric?
I didn't think it worked out because the timing was not right for James Blanchard's personal situation. And I think there were some family considerations. I think this had maybe been a year later, there would have been a different outcome. I do think he likes Texas Tech and likes living in Lubbock. But I think just the timing didn't work out for this move. And so Notre Dame presses on, and I've got more to say about that, but I'm just answering your specific question, so you don't yell at me.
I'll do my best to not yell at you either way, but Notre Dame does. The Blanchard thing played out somewhat publicly, at least because of the way it was reported. Do you think Notre Dame looks bad with how this played out?
I do have an opinion about that. And for me, only to people who don't understand the process and get duped by people reporting things with distorted information or weak or no context. And it's hard for readers these days. A lot of them, I have friends that have news feeds and stuff pops into their news feed and they think on their phone and they think, well, this is legitimate. It's on my phone. It's in my news feed. And sometimes it's distorted. Sometimes it's plagiarized. Sometimes it's fabricated. And there's just a lot of sloppy reporting, and not all of it's, there's a lot of great people on our beat. A lot of these people aren't even on our beat. And so I think some people jump the gun in terms of maybe portraying something as more of a done deal than it ever was. And I think that's why maybe it looks like, oh my gosh, this guy turned down Notre Dame. It was a done deal. What did they do to mess this up? So I think the people that did sloppy reporting are the ones that should look bad. I don't think Notre Dame does look bad to people who know what's going on.
Yeah, it was interesting to see how it was reported. And I think Matt Fortuna, and I'm not lumping in Matt Fortuna into the people that Eric is talking about, to be clear. Matt Fortuna was the first person I had seen to mention James Blanchard's name. And then not long after that, people started, I think, fast forwarding the process that hadn't necessarily played out yet. And like, typically when national reporters say so-and-so is being targeted by Notre Dame is targeting so-and-so for X position, that usually means it's almost a done deal, which is what happened with Pete Thamel breaking the news of Ja'Juan Seider coming to Notre Dame. And then we're able to confirm that information that he's expected to be Notre Dame's next running backs coach. But that wasn't the case when this was being happening. Now I know targeting, the word itself, isn't literally like, hey, this is going to end, but I think people are using different terminology maybe to make the reporting sound stronger than it is, or to make it more uncertain than it is, but with while seeming more certain than it is. I think he was literally just the guy that Notre Dame was targeting at that point. It wasn't something that Notre Dame was finalizing or that he had made a decision, and it was just about dotting the I's and crossing the T's. That was not where it was at. I think certainly from Notre Dame's perspective, or the perception, you'd like to be able to get your number one guy, which he clearly seemed to be. But I think he's hardly the only one who's qualified for a role that is sort of ever evolving. So I wanted to get I know you've done some reporting today, Eric, and get your thoughts on where does Notre Dame turn next? What are you hearing about a timeline or what's being prioritized?
Well, sure. So where I think we are with this now is Notre Dame hit the reset button. And I think it's probably a good thing. Not because there's not other great candidates out there, but these GM positions, they're not boilerplate descriptions. Different schools around the country are looking for different things with these, and that may change drastically depending on where college sports pulls us next through the courts, through lawsuits, and all the weird stuff that's going to be coming up related to this House settlement review that comes up on April 7th. And restructuring college sports, but you're going to have some coaches and athletic directors that are going to lean toward the recruiting part of this. There's going to be some that lean toward, hey, I want somebody that's going to crunch the numbers in terms of distributing money to players. And then I'll get into the detail about how this may change here after April 7th. But let's just talk specifically about the timeline here. I don't think anything's going to happen this week. I think Marcus Freeman's talking to a lot of people. And again, they're reevaluating, okay, what exactly do we want this to be? And then I think probably the earliest something we'd start to see movement would be next week. Again, there could be some surprises, but if you're going to bring people in to talk to them and have them look at campus and get to know them better and so forth, it could be 2 weeks. Now, could Notre Dame go with somebody internal for this? Yeah, they could, or somebody that they're familiar with. I mean, one person that I've been curious about if he would get into the mix is Dave Poloquin, who now works with Notre Dame's NIL efforts. I think Dave would be a really good person either with in the GM position or working with the new GM, just because of his extensive background at Notre Dame, having been there through all these Willingham, Weiss, Kelly, and Freeman regimes, being really good at what he does and knowing so much about not just the recruiting lane with us, but knowing so much more about it. I think he'd be a great asset. I'm really curious to see if he moves more back into this football operations part than the NIL stuff that he's been dealing with the past year.
Yeah, and I mean, those are more one of the same anymore with the way college football is evolving. Right. So, yeah, and I think we talked back when this position first came open, and people wondered if there were other guys on staff that or on the recruiting staff, for instance, that would be promoted. And Caleb Davis is the director of recruiting. I think is someone who's probably on the less experienced side. I mean, if you're talking about Dave Poloquin and the years that he has, especially even in just Notre Dame's athletic department, has much more experience than Caleb Davis. But Caleb Davis obviously has the recruiting experience. He spent a year down at Troy with Jared Parker as well. And then, but certainly knows the recruiting operations around Notre Dame. I think I'd be interested to see how things play out with whoever is named the general manager, what Caleb's role either stays as or becomes or grows, or how that's done. Because I would imagine that Marcus Freeman's preference will be to keep some guys in place that they already have, because they have a lot of trust and faith in some of the guys like Caleb Davis or Carter Allman, who have been working in the recruiting office for Notre Dame and have familiarity with the process and how Notre Dame works, because Notre Dame is a different place, right? You have to know the ins and outs, and that would certainly speak to something that Dave Poloquin would have plenty of experience with, of knowing people on campus and the relationships and the process and all those things. So I imagine there will be an exhaustive search in terms of trying to find guys, whether there's people with NFL experience or college GM experience. There's all kinds of things that I think can go into what this role can become. And it
And
doesn't
in my
necessarily
reporting, I can guarantee you that there is an exhaustive search going on. I mean,
all right.
yeah, they're really doing. Marcus is talking to a lot of people, probably more than he wants to, but yes.
Yeah, and so when you said like you don't expect anything to happen this week, you mean like in terms of someone being like finalized, right? That's what you meant by that, I
Right,
believe.
right. I mean, I think you might
It's not
start
that there's.
hearing some
I just want to make
names.
sure it's not. We're
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
Notre Dame's
yeah.
not doing anything this
Well,
week.
and
That's not what you mean.
let me explain why there's all this kind of code language with things, because people. Let's look at the Seider situation. So why don't we report Seider has been hired? This all goes back to the George O'Leary fiasco back after Bob Davie got fired. They hired George O'Leary. There were some inconsistencies on his resume. They didn't do background checks, and he ends up getting fired after 4 days. And so Notre Dame's like, you're not going to catch us doing this again. So it became this protracted, exhaustive for every head coach and assistant coach. It would be weeks sometimes. Now, I'll give Notre Dame credit. They have narrowed that down a bit. They've gotten to the point where they've gotten the majority of it done, and then they'll announce a hiring. They did this with Chris Ash a few days after he was poised to be the next, or expected to be the next head coach or a defensive coordinator. I'm sorry. They said, hey, he's our defensive coordinator. We're putting out a graphic pending the completion of the employment process. But that's why there's maybe some inconsistency in the language there, but that's what the process is at Notre Dame. You're not going to get this guy is the hiring. It's a done deal, because there's always that, well, if they find something in the vetting process, they're going to go in reverse and hit the trap door. So that's why this is a little bit confusing. But there's, some people have asked me, well, I mean, why hasn't Seider been officially named yet? This is the reason. Blame George O'Leary.
All right. We have just a couple questions in the queue, so feel free to add some more. And we'll get to those now, and then we'll start talking a little bit about recruiting. Jeff Stevens asked, do the Bengals and Raiders have to pay the buyouts for the contracts of Golden and McCullough?
I'll let you get that one, because that's not something I really study. A lot of the assistants don't have more than 2-year contracts, and I'm not sure where Deland's was. Do you know, Tyler?
I do not know that. I don't know the specifics in their individual contracts. I was always under the impression that it was the coach's responsibility to pay the buyout, which obviously usually whoever is hiring them usually takes care of that. Like, I don't know. I don't think that Notre Dame can require those NFL teams to have to pay them. I think it would be the person who signed the contract with them. And so I don't know what language was in their contracts. I would imagine there was probably some buyout language, but I don't know that it's not necessarily changing Notre Dame's bottom line or impacting what Notre Dame's doing on the hiring market. All right, Chris W. asked, spring ball around the 25th, question mark.
I don't think it's going to be that deep. I don't think they could get 15 practices in between the 25th and April 12th. I think it's going to be a compressed timeline, but I don't think it's starting that late. Initially, the plan would have been to get a couple of practices in before spring break, then take the spring break, and then resume the week of March 17th. It seems to be more realistic that they would start the week of March 17th, but we haven't got official word yet on that.
Yeah, that would seem to make sense. I don't know why you'd wait an extra week after getting back for spring break. They gotta get a move on it once they get back on campus.
Right.
All right. Wanted to talk a little bit about recruiting. And like I mentioned, please feel free to submit some more questions. A lack of a general manager hasn't made a noticeable impact on Notre Dame's recruiting efforts in the 2026 class. The recruiting calendar is in a dead period through March 2nd, so that helps on that front. Notre Dame staff is working on lining up unofficial visits for the spring and slating official visits for June. As I mentioned earlier, Caleb Davis, the director of recruiting and assistant to the general manager, Carter Allman, are still in place, which has made the transition of Chad Bowden leaving a little bit easier. The operation can run as close to fully functioning as possible. Notre Dame has a class of 7 verbal commits in the 2026 cycle, ranks number 7 in the country according to Rivals. The Irish have 6 4-star recruits and 1 3-star recruit. I did a story the other day for our subscribers on Inside ND Sports about the biggest positions of need in the 2026 class. I wanted to see what you thought, Eric. What positions do you think are the biggest needs for Notre Dame in this class?
I think you could ask some people, and they would say this for every class, but I would go with defensive linemen. I think Notre Dame has the numbers there. I think they have to continually upgrade that position group. I would go number 2. I know that they have Dylan Faison in the class, but I think wide receivers beyond Dylan Faison, again, continuing to upgrade wide receiver recruiting. And then I would go with tight end at this point. As we look at the ones that commitments Notre Dame already has, they have their quarterback. They have 3 offensive linemen and out of the 7 people. So those are 2 that you would normally put in there that I'm not putting in there because they have commitments there. How about you?
I had wide receiver at number 1 over defensive line. I did split up defensive end and defensive tackle. So maybe if I group them all together, maybe I would put defensive line ahead of receiver. But I just think there's a lot of development needed at the position in the past recruiting class. Elijah Burris is the most sure thing in my opinion, and he's still a 3-star recruit. Notre Dame does have some candidates, I think, that are attractive at the wide receiver position outside of Dylan Faison, who's already committed to Notre Dame. He's actually the 1 3-star recruit who I alluded to earlier. But I came up with a list of 5 4-star recruits who aren't necessarily long shots that Notre Dame is going after in the 2026 class at the position. Defensive end was where I put second. I think there's probably some tougher recruiting battles when you look at, okay, who are Notre Dame's top defensive end targets in this class than maybe at the receiver position. And I think defensive end is the bigger need versus defensive tackle, because I do think there's a chance that some of the 2025 defensive ends like Joseph Reefer, Christopher Burgess could end up being defensive tackles long-term. So I think those guys, Notre Dame needs to continue to recruit defensive end at a high level in this class. Tight end was the third one for me. I think it's sort of surprising that you put tight end high on the list, because it's usually something that's pretty easy for Notre Dame to recruit at, and may be. But I think as we've seen with recent tight end offers, there's a lot of work to do there for Notre Dame in this cycle. And I think this is a class that Notre Dame may need to sign 2 tight ends after signing 1 each in the past 2 classes, with James Flanagan in the 2025 class and then Jack Larson in the 2024 class. And then also Notre Dame has recently was named to some top 10 lists for a trio of 2026 targets: cornerback Kari Adams, cornerback Hakeem Satterwhite, and defensive tackle Damari Simeon. Adams put Notre Dame in his top 10. He plans to make an official visit to Notre Dame in June. He is the number 23 safety according to Rivals, but Notre Dame has been recruiting him as a corner. Hakeem Satterwhite hasn't visited Notre Dame. He was supposed to visit for Junior Day. He's the number 20 cornerback according to Rivals. And then Damari Simeon has visited Notre Dame twice, and he did so last year. He's the number 14 defensive tackle according to Rivals, 6'3", 275-pound kid out of the Northeast that Notre Dame likes, and he is showing high interest as well. So those are some names to continue to watch there as we move forward. I will hop into some of the questions submitted. Terry Howie says, "Hi, gents. How does our kicking game look going into this upcoming season?"
Well, James Rundell will be back for a second season at punter. As far as kicker, they got what is it now? The 4th year in a row. It's been a grad transfer kicker, and it's Burnett from North Carolina. What's his first name, Tyler? Do you know? Noah Burnett from North Carolina. And they also have a freshman coming in who backs up both of those positions in Eric Schmidt. So they've got somebody that they can develop behind that and maybe give them a better plan B if there's an injury like there was this past year. at kicker. So I think they're going to be in pretty good position if we want to expand the kicking game to coverage and return guys. There's lots of great candidates there. So I think pretty good position.
Yeah, Burnett is interesting to me. I know he dealt with an injury this year, so that may be to blame, or you may think that is to blame for his accuracy. But it was also it just happened to be the same accuracy he had as a sophomore in 2022, or as a freshman, or I don't guess would he have been a sophomore? Yeah, he's a graduate student, so that would have been a sophomore season. So I don't know. I don't know what version of Noah Burnett Notre Dame's going to get. Will they get the guy who made 71% of his field goals in 2022 and 2024? Or will they get the guy who made 95% of his field goals in 2023? So Marty Biaggi obviously feels good about Burnett. That's why Notre Dame went out and got him out of the transfer portal. And we'll see how Notre Dame fares with him and what Burnett can do. But I think there is a little bit of a question mark there from my perspective. But the way Notre Dame has had success with these grad transfer kickers, I think there's some trust that can be put into what Notre Dame's doing there.
Yeah, I would say like Spencer Schrader was a guy that did not have good raw number accuracy, and Marty Biaggi saw something in both with the length and again, it took him a while till he was accurate. He was banging them from way beyond 50 yards, but wasn't completely accurate. But he ended up being a pretty good kicker.
All right. More questions. Outbound says, do you think this is going to be very downplayed for the presumed starters this spring because of the long season and see more younger guys and more quarterback battle?
I'm going to let you decode that for me first, and you answer it first, and then I will, because I'm not sure what the question is there.
Yeah, I think we will see more younger guys in spring than usual. I think there will probably be some veterans who are
at all positions. Is that what the question is? Or
I
just
don't know
quarterbacks?
I think the question is will this spring just be downplayed because it will be more about younger guys than the presumed starters, and then obviously the quarterback battle will be
okay.
The biggest thing that people are talking about. I think he's
outbound. You answer the question or ask the question right. Sometimes it just takes me a while to understand. So
yeah, I mean, I do think it will be more young player focused, but there will be some position battles that will be watching moving forward. There's a lot of guys that I think are younger players that will have chances to step up, and certainly the quarterback competition will be heavily discussed as we get to see what we get to see throughout the spring. But yeah, I think it will feel a little bit different. It'll be interesting to see like what guys look like. Will there be a notable difference in guys? Will what they're being how different will what they're being asked be that from previous years is something that we're interested to learn about as well.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus wants the starters to feel challenged and so forth. So, I mean, it's not going to be complete. Hey, yeah, these guys are the starters. You young guys battle it out for whoever's going to be third team, whatever. But I think it's an important spring in a lot of positions. I think we're going to eventually get into that, Tyler. But I do think that there's some important battles. And also you form like let's say the safety position. We know Adon Schuler's going to be a starter, and there's a lot of candidates for that other starter. But it's not just who's the other starter going to be. It's how deep do you want that rotation? You get a real good sense in the spring of, boy, we could play 4 guys and not lose anything here. Or we can play 2 guys, and then when we get to 3 and 4, there's a big drop off. I think those are some of the things you find out in spring.
All right. Brian Habermill says, do you think Seider bring some 2 running back formations that many fans seem to love? The only 2 back sets I personally like are those with the fullback or H-back.
I mean, he may have some ideas about that. I think Mike Denbrock might have some ideas based on what Notre Dame's personnel looks like. But I don't know that it's ever going to be a staple. I just think there's times that you can because of the skill sets of the running backs, you can kind of play around with that a little bit, because you have some running backs that you can split out wide and get some, with either motion or just changing the formation at the line of scrimmage, you can get some mismatches there. But I think that's certainly something that they're going to talk about. I mean, that's part of the fun of putting the playbook together, is having those kind of discussions.
Yeah, I don't know Seider's thoughts on whether he likes it. I would generally I would assume that coaches like when more of their players are on the field and they can have more impact on the game. So a running back coach being in favor of 2 running back formations would not be surprising. But I don't remember it being like a huge part of Penn State's offense. Now, obviously they had 2 running backs they used a lot, but I don't know. I tried to look up, and I don't know there's a good way to look up. I was looking through some PFF stuff, but I didn't find the best way to find that out.
I think Tyler Warren's versatility kind of overpowered all those other ideas because of the unique ways that they used him on offense.
Right.
That there wasn't as much opportunity to use a 2-back system, because he was like a back. I mean, you could play him at Wildcat. You could put him in different places in the formation. He was really fun to watch in their creativity with their offense.
Yeah, so Warren played 916 snaps. 985 was the most for any Penn State player. Singleton played 540 and Katron Allen played 533. So just if you do the math, they probably didn't play a lot of snaps together based on that, but I don't know what that breakdown is exactly. TD4ND asks, how will Seider's hire elevate Florida recruiting? And we
talked to Adam Freeman about that, and didn't end up using it in my story. I probably could have. But Adam Freeman, who works for Rivals, he's now the recruiting. He's the rankings director. He also does all the transfer portal stuff where he's in charge of that. But he's a really good recruiting analyst, and he feels like those Florida ties are going to have Seider not only looking in Florida, but having some success getting some running backs out of Florida. That was his thought.
Yeah, and I think just he has those relationships down there, and I think that matters. Like it, I think one thing that Notre Dame has struggled with, and I think Brian Kelly even moved away from because of some unsuccessful stories out of recruiting Florida, was that sometimes it can be hard to find guys that are Notre Dame fits. And I think the better relationships you have with people down there can give you a better sense for, okay, are these guys actually fits, or is everyone just telling us great things about this kid and it's not going to work out at Notre Dame? I think those relationships really matter, and having that local knowledge. And so I think that could be a way that maybe doesn't show up in Notre Dame's commitment list, but in terms of the amount of time Notre Dame's spending on players in Florida, that they can maybe better align their resources in terms of, okay, this is someone we should actually spend time on. This is someone that we shouldn't spend time on. Chris W says, when is the next big recruiting day? I'm not sure that there is a big one. I'm sure there will probably be another junior day in March, but I don't know when that is. I haven't heard of anything. I think towards the end of March. I know at least there's one wide receiver target planning to be on campus. So maybe that's going to end up being a big day. Mostly I've been hearing more about guys scheduling official visits for the summer in June. And so maybe I think, yeah, part of the uncertainty with that is like usually it's built around spring practices. And so I think Notre Dame's been cobbling that together and putting that together, the spring schedule, based on how things have changed with the way how long the season lasts. Yeah, March 28th and 29th is when Brody Keefe is supposed to be on campus. So maybe that ends up being a bigger weekend. And then the Blue Gold game, Notre Dame tries to make a big deal as a big spring recruiting opportunity. And so that's those would be sort of times to watch. And we'll have whatever it does become, we'll have more information as it becomes more clear. Jeff Stevens says, do you think the blue gold game will soon go the way of the Pro Bowl skills challenge? Should it, in your opinion?
I don't think it's going to go away. And I don't know why you would want to make it go away at this point. I think they found a format that works. They can make it a fun thing for fans, fun thing for the players, and fun for recruits. You get you have the draft and so forth. You make it competitive, and you get some young players out there in front of not the crowds that they'll see in the fall, but certainly bigger crowds than what's at practice typically. So I don't know. I know why you're asking. I think I know why you're asking the question, Jeff, because Nebraska's talked about shutting its spring game down. But I don't know that Notre Dame feels the same way along that lines. How about you, Tyler? What do you think there?
Yeah, I just think it's too valuable to sort of turn into a shorts and t-shirts thing with this, like a skills challenge. Now, maybe you shorten the amount of reps you're taking during a game, and then you add that to it. But I think there is enough value in maybe say you only play one half rather than two halves. But I think you're going to learn. It is a learning opportunity about the players on your roster. Now, Notre Dame does a good job with jersey scrimmages and things like that to try to simulate those situations. But I think it's still a valuable piece for Notre Dame and for other colleges in sort of getting a gauge on what you have. Obviously, there's an injury risk that comes with that, and something that you tried to obviously negate. But like if you're going to practice, like I don't know that the injury risk is that much greater in a jersey scrimmage or in the blue gold game than the jersey scrimmage. I would think that you would still keep it in a similar format. Now, I think certainly maybe it's more younger players and maybe some of the older guys are given more time off in the spring and maybe don't play as much in the blue gold game. And I think we've already started to see that a little bit, as it's not necessarily a measuring stick for returning starters who are veterans. All right, Brian Habermel asks, is the Nickelback transfer from Alabama participating in spring ball?
Devontae Smith is going to participate. 6 of the 8 transfers are participating. The 2 that aren't are Malachi Fields, who's the wide receiver from West Virginia, and who am I forgetting, Tyler?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I will look here. I can look at the list. Ty Washington, the tight end from Arkansas, is the other one. So the other 6 will be here. Are here.
All right. Mike DeVoy says, I'm going to miss Max Hurleman returning punts. Who are the candidates for punt returner? Faison, Greathouse? ?
Faison, Greathouse are 2 of them. I'm sure that there's other people to look at. I remember during the Gong Show days, they had a pretty deep group of people that we're looking at, but Faison and Greathouse would be high on that list.
Was Aeneas Williams back there sometimes catching punts?
Aeneas Williams was back there catching punts. Jaden Mickey was back there catching punts as well. Now he's not on the team anymore, but that was a guy that was back there catching punts. Yeah, Aeneas Williams was definitely one of the guys that they'll consider with that. And I would think probably more likely than Faison at this point, the whole lacrosse thing and how much of that commitment takes up for Jordan Faison, I do think affects all the things you can ask of him, because his body never really gets a big rest. He's just coming back to practice now with the lacrosse team. They've already played a game, or they're playing on Wednesday, rather. They played an exhibition game. He's not going to play in the first 2 or 3 games, but he goes right from lacrosse into summer football and then fall camp and so forth. So do you really want to tax him with that? So I would include him but not expect him to rise to the top there with everything he's got going on.
Yeah, and I wouldn't think Fields would in terms of the receivers coming in. Will Pauling, I don't think he's done that at Wisconsin. KK Smith is maybe a guy that gets back there. He's been a guy that's had some struggles staying healthy at Notre Dame, and then maybe some of the younger freshmen or redshirt freshmen get involved as well.
It'd be interesting if Dallas Golden got involved. Now he's not going to be there this spring, but
Dallas
he'll
Golden
be here in June.
Is quite the player. Mark Zachary as well as another guy that's dynamic. That you get the ball in his hands and just let him try to do something. Terry Howie says, since Love is going pro after the upcoming season, do you think he will get more carries to pad his numbers and possibly compete for the Heisman?
Well, you've made that announcement. I mean, I think we all expect him to go after this season, and it makes sense for him to. I think he'll get more carries for a couple of reasons. One, the biggest one is Riley Leonard's not on the team anymore. Riley Leonard led Notre Dame in carries last year, and whoever the quarterback is not going to have near as many carries that Riley Leonard had in games. So that's going to give all the running backs some more opportunities. But I think Jeremiah Love will get more carries. Not to pad his numbers. I think the NFL knows what Jeremiah can do, but I think there may be third downs where you say, you know what, this guy may be the best player in college football in 2025. We need to have him on the field on third down, as good as Aeneas Williams has been on third down. Maybe it makes sense for Jeremiah, especially, I mean, Riley Leonard was on so many third and fourth down conversions. Again, not having him there maybe changes the dynamics of how you think about third down, but I think Jeremiah Love will get more opportunities.
Yeah, I don't think that it would be done with the Heisman Trophy in mind necessarily, or like the NFL. I don't know that the NFL needs to or probably wants to see a guy get a ton of carries unless his team absolutely needs him to, because he'll be fresher and have less wear and tear on his body. So I think that he will get more carries, I would imagine. But I mean, we're talking about a running backs coach who just had two very good running backs who were NFL prospects, and they split carries as well. So I think there will still be plenty of carries shared in Notre Dame's backfield. Scott Fegan asked, does the 2025 team look deeper and more talented than 2024? We lose some great players, but with all the injuries and younger players getting game experience, this looks like a very strong team.
I think it is a very strong team. I'm not sure that it's deeper and more talented. I would have to go through that at every position, and I'm calculating that in my mind. But I mean, there's key positions like quarterback, I think, is a bigger question mark, even though we feel really good about the alternatives Notre Dame has there. It's still going to be somebody that's fairly inexperienced. You look at interior defensive line, and that seems like it's coming together, but boy, I need to see it in the spring and the wide receiver. So I'll have a better answer for you, Scott. Tyler may have more intuitiveness than me at this point, but I need to see some spring practices.
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell, and we don't know what the spring transfer portal does to that depth too. Like maybe there are more guys that leave in April, and that would impact your outlook for the season. So I think it's an interesting offseason conversation. It's not one I've spent a lot of time evaluating right now, and maybe it's an interesting story idea to do in the coming weeks. But it's too early for me to feel strongly about that. But I do agree that there are talented guys. I mean, especially just the offensive line alone, like going into last season versus going into this season, it's completely different picture of who you feel good about, and almost feeling like you have too many options, where last year was like, well, who are they going to have play this position? So I think Notre Dame's in a pretty good spot, at least on the offensive line. Irish fan says, who do you guys see being early captain candidates, and who's wearing the green dot on defense?
Okay, the green dot will be easier because that'll be Drake Bowen, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Captain candidates, boy, I haven't even thought that far ahead. Tyler, I'm going to tap dance. You answer that first, and it takes me longer to think because I'm older.
You don't tap dance very long, so I have to pull up things fast. Captain candidates. I mean, this would be something that would be surprising to say early in his career, but maybe Jordan Botelho is a captain candidate, as someone who decides to stick around on this team. Gabriel Rubio could be someone that you would look at. I think Christian Gray would be an excellent candidate to be a captain. I certainly, if you're going to make Drake Bowen your green dot, why couldn't he be a captain as well? Emil Wagner on the offensive line would be a candidate. Maybe Eli Raridan, one of your tight ends. I think those are some of the guys that come to mind. I mean, Jeremiah Love would be a natural pick there. So those would be my early scrolling through the scholarship chart guesses right now. Billy Strauss,
I'm copying off of your paper. I haven't thought. James Rendell, the punter. But I mean, it's a great question. It's just I haven't processed that because I want to see that leadership play out. I don't think we've seen that yet, and that's why it's hard to predict. I mean, the thing about it is, Irish fan, when you interview these guys, I mean, they're remarkably intelligent and they have all these great traits that I didn't have even now, but I definitely didn't have them when I was their age. And so you could see the potential in a lot of players like that. Like KVA is a guy that you think, man, that guy's going to be a leader someday. And you know, Adon Schuler, I think, is a guy that shows a lot of leadership, but again, how it plays out in practices and so forth, that's where it's kind of earned. So.
All right. Ron Robert asks, any Chicago area kids being recruited on the defensive side of the ball? And I can hop in here. I made sure I got all the names in front of me.
I was with Tom Lemming yesterday for a while, so I know that he's pushing for some of those.
Yeah, in terms of the 2026 class, Mikhail Blade, out of, I believe he's at Simeon now. He transferred at some point.
Yep.
So I think he's someone that Notre Dame is interested in on the defensive line. Braden Jones is committed to USC at Mount Carmel. Those are both 2026 defensive ends that Notre Dame is interested in. The only other one that I know of that has an offer is 2028 defensive tackle from Mount Carmel, Caleb Tucker, whose nickname is the Bone Crusher. I tweeted about him a while ago.
Just for that. That would be a great NIL thing too.
Yeah. So those are the defensive names. There are some other. Mount Carmel, I think, is going to be a school that has a lot of talent. Is a school with a lot of talent. I think is going to be a school that Notre Dame is going to be paying a lot of attention towards. I know it recently offered Cloud Puma. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right there. An offensive lineman out of Mount Carmel that has a growing offer list. So there is some attention being paid in Chicago, not just by Notre Dame, but nationwide. And there's some interesting talent there after Notre Dame signed a handful of guys in the 2025 class.
This is way more in Tyler's lane than mine, but I did have dinner with Tom Lemming and the guy who has endowed the position at Notre Dame, Peter Chivarelli, the defensive line coaching position. So I got a lot of information about there is not just in the 2026 classes, but in the younger classes, there's kind of a treasure trove of talent coming up on at least at the defensive line position in Chicago. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next few cycles.
Yeah, Notre Dame hasn't really made a push for offers in the 2027 class or the 2028 class. Caleb Tucker was an outlier. That usually would come on St. Patrick's Day of this coming year for the 2027 class. I haven't confirmed that that's what they'll do again. I imagine it will be the same plan. Maybe the next general manager has different ideas, but they've at least set it up that way where they have a significantly less 2027 offers than some of the top teams in the country. And I would expect many to go out here in the coming month plus to those 2027 recruits. So I don't know which Chicago area guys would be included on that list. I'm not well versed enough to just know those guys without them having offers already. All right. Clashmore Mike, could ND look at the GM position being parceled out to more than one person fulfilling the responsibility?
I think that, Mike, they'll have somebody named general manager, but in terms of what the duties are, I mean, it's going to spread to a lot of different people. There's so much here, and I really didn't get into. I'm writing about this for tomorrow. You're playing with a list of both short-term and long-term of not knowing what's going to exactly happen with college sports. You could have the scholarship limit at 85 next year. You could have it at 105 next year. You could have it at someplace in between. And we may or may not know where that's headed on April 7th, because as soon as that House settlement is approved, you're going to have a whole bunch of lawsuits filed. So how does that affect the numbers going forward? And guess what? You have this transfer portal period coming up April 16th through the 25th that's going to affect things again. So I would say not only is the GM position important, but how you approach it beyond that, how you staff it beyond the general manager himself. And keep in mind, too, when we're talking about recruiting, recruits aren't going to pick a school based on who the general manager is. They're going to base it on Marcus Freeman and his staff. What the general manager can do is help them identify the right people, help organize it. They can do a lot of the legwork, but ultimately Marcus Freeman and the coaches are going to make the biggest impression on these recruits.
Yeah, I think it's important that there is some delineation between recruiting and personnel. And the GM, I think, has to sort of meld those things together, but it remains to be seen. I think if why am I forgetting his name? The Texas Tech guy,
Blanchard.
James Blanchard was hired. He seemed to have more of a hand in recruiting and a background in that. And so maybe he would have been continue to be involved in recruiting, or maybe he wants to move out of that. He must not want to do it enough to come to Notre Dame based on what his current role is at Texas Tech. And maybe his role at Texas Tech will continue to evolve too. But I think
it's got to evolve, Tyler, because we're going to be playing by different rules here pretty soon. So
right.
We just don't know exactly what those new rules are going to be.
Right.
So it's going to be pivot.
All right. Another one from Clashmore Mike. Do we have any updates on Jason Onye? Hearing he may be viable again to play next year, this may be fulfilling a huge gap.
Well, we've reported that he's been on the roster. We've reported he has the intent to play, and Notre Dame is expecting him to practice, and we'll see if that continues to go forward. But that's the plan right now, is that he would compete for a spot. And if he's the Jason Onye that picks up from the end of September and is able to make some progress during the spring, that's better than a portal pickup. He's a really good player.
Yeah, I think I think some people are trying to get ahead of this and make proclamations about Jason Onye maybe too fast. And I think he needs to sort of see things through on his own time and let him make any statements about what he's doing and his intent. I think I did not see him, although it probably wasn't hard to see him if you were actually looking for him. But I was told that he was in the student section at the Notre Dame men's basketball game on Saturday, which there weren't a lot of people in the student section, so it shouldn't have been hard to spot him. But I did not spend any time looking in the student section. I was blinded by bad basketball instead. So hopefully things work out for Jason Onye and his ability to stay a member of Notre Dame's team and be one who can contribute. We've had high expectations for him in the past, and certainly that is a big area of need for Notre Dame going into next season, the defensive tackle position. All right, I'll do one last question here from Jeff Stevens. The older Kia was the bomb at last year's blue and gold game. Is he healthy and ready to compete as a rotational linebacker?
He suffered his ACL in the summertime. And so if you say 9 to 12 months for an ACL, then he's getting to the front end of that timeline of the most optimistic return. I don't know that they would push it with him in the spring. They may wait until the summer. I want to get clarification from Marcus on that. I don't want to report that. I know his younger brother, isn't arriving until June. But yeah, I mean, think about the wealth of talent at that linebacker position when you think you're losing Kaiser and potentially nobody else, and you're adding Manfaremo and Anthony Saka and Koho Kia and getting Hanu Kia back, and you got Preston Zinner and some of these younger guys. Whew, where are they all going to play?
Yeah, a good problem for Max Bullough to have going into next season. Much rather his position than maybe some of the difficult decisions and competitions ahead for Al Washington and the interior of Notre Dame's defensive line. All right, I think that's going to be it for questions and for our show tonight. Make sure, as we mentioned at the top of the show, that you're subscribed to us here on our YouTube channel. That allows you to get questions in for the next shows upcoming. If you are watching on replay, we still like to hear from you. So let us know your thoughts on some of the comments we had, or maybe the comments some of the.
And I usually go by during the week and try to answer the questions, or at least hit the like button on the compliments.
That's right. And so please contribute there. We'd also like for you to consider joining us over at InsideNDSports.com. You can get a 30-day free trial with promo code NDYT. There's a link to subscribe in the video description below. Eric and I have not had this discussion off air, but I know there's a women's basketball game next Monday, so we may want to move it again next week. Football Never Sleeps being it. But we'll let you guys know what our plan is for the schedule as it relates to next week.
Big women's basketball game, Notre Dame and Duke.
So the way Eric describes that, it sounds like we shouldn't have it on Monday. So keep an eye out to make sure. Tuesday would probably be the next bet, but we'll make sure that we get our schedule set for next week and keep everyone informed. But we appreciate everyone tuning in, and have a good week. And stay out of the snow if it's coming your way.